They said she lasted 37 minutes. 37 minutes of screaming in the dark, her voice echoing against the cold walls of an alien ship. 37 minutes of defiance, even as they broke her body piece by piece. And then, silence. The aliens laughed. They thought humanity's spirit was as fragile as flesh. To them, she was just another experiment, a warning to a species they considered beneath them. But death has never been the end for us. Not for humans, not for her. Because 37 minutes later she opened her eyes, and when she did, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. They thought they'd killed a girl. Instead, they awakened something else. The only question that remained was this: what happens when a species that refuses to die decides it's time to fight back? She was 17. Not a soldier, not a commander, not one of the legends the galaxy would come to fear. Just a girl, ordinary in every way, except for the fierce spark in her eyes. Her name was Lyra Kane, born in the dust-gray streets of Titan's colony, where life was harsh and survival itself felt like defiance against the void. She loved small things, books scavenged from old Earth shipments, the sound of rain in the hydrodomes, the way her little brother laughed when she tossed him high into low gravity. She was human in the simplest, purest sense, fragile, curious, stubborn. And that was exactly why the aliens took her. The Cathari didn't want a soldier. They didn't want someone trained to endure. They wanted proof. A specimen. Something soft they could break in front of the galaxy to remind everyone what humanity truly was. Weak, temporary, insignificant. They found her walking home from the colony's market, a bag of bread clutched against her chest. She didn't even see the shadow descend, didn't hear the shriek of their engines until it was too late. By the time her mother looked up, Lyra was gone. For 3 days, her family searched. Her father pounded his fists bloody against the doors of Titan's security office, demanding answers. Her brother cried himself to sleep, clutching her jacket. No one spoke it aloud, but they all knew the truth. The Cathari had her, and no one came back from the Cathari. Inside their ship, the walls were slick with cold light, humming with machinery older than human history. Lyra was chained in silence, her heart pounding loud enough that she wondered if they could hear it. She tried to be brave, tried to remember her father's voice, her mother's touch. But the fear was real, and it was crushing. The Cathari studied her like she was nothing more than a puzzle to unravel. They asked no questions. They wanted no answers. They wanted screams, because screams carried farther than words ever could. They wanted her suffering to echo across intercepted frequencies, proof that humans were breakable. What they didn't understand was that humans had always been breakable. Fragile bones, soft skin, short lifespans. And yet somehow, we had crossed oceans of fire, built homes on dead worlds, and stood against species stronger, faster, and more advanced than us. Lyra Kane was not supposed to be special. But in the void between her last heartbeat and her first breath again, she became something the Cathari never expected. For 37 minutes, the girl they thought was just another fragile human lay still. For 37 minutes, the aliens congratulated themselves, certain they had made their point. And then, her heart started again. The Cathari called it the lesson. To them, it was not just cruelty. It was art. Each species they conquered was forced to watch one of their own broken, their last screams carried across the stars as a warning. Entire civilizations bent their knees under the weight of those echoes. When they strapped Lyra Kane to the chair, the metal was so cold she thought her skin would freeze against it. She struggled, wrists raw against the restraints, but there was no breaking free. The chamber was circular, sterile, almost beautiful in its simplicity. A single light glowed above her like an artificial sun. The Cathari did not look monstrous at first glance. Tall, sleek, With skin that shimmered faintly like polished obsidian, their faces were expressionless masks broken only by the glint of black eyes. But their voices were the worst, soft, measured, almost gentle. It made the things they did feel worse than screams. "Humanity," one of them said, his tone calm as though giving a lecture. "Flesh bound by fear. The body breaks. The mind crumbles. You are not exceptional. You are not eternal. You are prey." The first cut was shallow, deliberate. Lyra's scream ripped from her throat, carried through hidden microphones, broadcasted across frequencies she could not imagine. Back on Titan, her father heard it. In the security office, the engineers heard it. Across Earth and Mars, intercepted signals translated the sound of a girl being broken alive, and the galaxy listened. Minutes blurred into eternity. Pain was the only measure of time. The Cathari did not kill quickly. They were precise, scientific. She counted, though she didn't mean to, each rib they broke, each surge of agony until she was certain her mind itself would shatter. And yet, through blood and broken breath, she whispered one word. "No." The alien leaned closer. "No?" Lyra's voice cracked, but she forced it again. "No." It wasn't courage, not really. It was desperation, a refusal to give them the satisfaction of her surrender. If this was all she had left, the power to deny them her silence, then she would use it until her lungs collapsed. They pushed harder. The lesson had to be complete. Humanity had to learn fear. 37 minutes after they began, her body gave out. Her last memory was of light flickering above her, dissolving into darkness. Her chest stilled. Her breathing stopped. On Titan, her brother's sobs filled their small home. Her father collapsed to his knees. Somewhere deep in the void, the Cathari shut off the broadcast, satisfied. The girl was dead. They unstrapped her body and left it on the floor, nothing more than discarded flesh. The chamber emptied, the echoes of her screams fading into silence. But silence has a way of breaking. At first, it was faint, an electric twitch in her fingers, a stutter of breath. Then her chest rose, once, twice, like a machine rebooting after shutdown. Her eyes snapped open. The dead girl was breathing. The nearest Cathari recoiled, his mask of calm cracking for the first time in his life. "Impossible," Lyra gasped, air burning her lungs, confusion flooding her mind. She remembered dying. She knew she had died. And yet, she was back. Broken, bleeding, but undeniably alive. The aliens backed away. Some whispered, others argued, their voices sharp with disbelief. Their instruments confirmed it. Her body had ceased function. She had been clinically, biologically dead, and yet she stood again. Humans had always been fragile. But this was something else. The Cathari recorded every second, sending frantic signals through their networks. They didn't know if they had failed, or if they had just awakened something they did not understand. Lyra staggered to her feet. The chains slipped from her wrists as if the metal itself no longer knew how to hold her. Her eyes burned, not with fire but with a strange, unyielding clarity. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but it no longer owned her. And somewhere deep within the ship, as her pulse thundered back to life, humanity's fleets received the final fragments of the broadcast. Screams. Silence. And then, a heartbeat. On Earth, generals froze as the monitors confirmed what they were hearing. On Titan, her father clutched the radio, tears streaming down his face as his daughter's heart began to beat again. She was alive, and the Cathari, beings who had broken empires with fear, felt something they had not known in millennia. Doubt. The galaxy had heard a girl die. Now the galaxy would hear her live. The Cathari were not supposed to fear. They had spent centuries conquering, dissecting, and dismantling civilizations with clinical precision. Fear was for prey, not predators. Yet when Lyra Kane opened her eyes after death, silence fell across the chamber like a funeral shroud. Her breaths came ragged, each inhale cutting through the stillness like a blade. She should not have been standing. Every nerve in her body screamed with memory of agony. And yet, she was upright, alive, undeniable, unbroken. The Cathari commander stepped forward, his black eyes narrowing. "This is anomaly." His voice trembled despite himself. "Flesh does not return." Lyra raised her head. Blood streaked her face, her hair clinging to damp skin. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse but steady. "You wanted a lesson?" Her lips curled into something between a sob and a laugh. "Then listen." The lights flickered. Not by chance. Across the ship, human infiltrators had already breached the Cathari's network. They had been listening, tracking every frequency, every scream. And when her heartbeat returned, Earth's military made its choice. The ship shook as the first barrage struck. Hull plates groaned. Sirens wailed. For the first time, the predators realized the prey had come hunting. Lyra staggered as explosions rattled the walls, but her eyes locked on the commander. He towered over her, obsidian skin shimmering under the alarms. Still, for the first time, she saw him not as executioner, but as afraid. "They'll come for me," she whispered. "They'll come for all of us." The commander hissed, lashing out, but Lyra moved with desperate instinct. Chains meant to restrain her became weapons in her hands. The steel links wrapped around his arm, and with a surge of strength born not from muscle but from raw defiance, she pulled. Bone cracked, alien flesh tore, and the giant collapsed to his knees with a roar. The chamber door burst open. Human Marines flooded in, weapons blazing. Tactical helmets reflected the crimson alarms, their boots pounding like war drums. For weeks they had chased whispers of the missing girl. For 37 minutes they had listened to her screams. And now they had arrived to finish the lesson. The firefight was short, brutal. Cathari soldiers fell, their precision faltering under the shock of resistance. Humanity did not fight like prey. They fought like creatures who had crawled out of death itself. Lyra collapsed as one of the Marines caught her, wrapping her in a thermal cloak. "We've got her! She's alive! God, she's alive!" But alive was not enough. Not anymore. Because the broadcast wasn't over. Across hundreds of systems, billions had already heard her last scream. Billions had believed humanity broken. Now those same networks carried something else, the sound of gunfire, the roar of defiance, the undeniable fact that a human girl had died and risen. The Cathari's lesson had become a weapon turned against them. Their greatest cruelty had birthed something far worse for their empire. Hope. Lyra's voice, barely a whisper, carried through the open comms as Marines fought to secure the ship. "You thought we were fragile. You thought death was enough to stop us." She lifted her head, bloodied lips trembling into a grin that should not have been possible. "But we don't stay dead." Her words spread faster than any fleet could travel. Across the galaxy, conquered worlds stirred, chains rattled, knees unbent. For the first time in centuries, the Empire's grip loosened, not by armies, not by weapons, but by the defiance of one broken, ordinary girl who refused to remain silent in the dark. The commander writhed at her feet, his arm twisted, his face contorted not with rage but with something far more dangerous. Recognition. This was no anomaly. This was humanity. And the lesson was only beginning. The Cathari ship burned. From Titan's command post, Her father watched the feed in stunned silence. He had braced himself for silence, for the final confirmation that his daughter was gone forever. Instead, he saw her, bloodied, barely standing but alive, shielded by armored Marines as they dragged her to safety. The engineers in the room wept openly. Hardened soldiers clenched their fists. Even the governor, who had spoken of surrender only hours earlier, stared at the screen with wide, disbelieving eyes. A girl who should have been a corpse was walking again. And her voice was already racing faster than light across every channel the Cathari had tried to control. Across the galaxy, billions listened. On a mining world broken under Cathari whips, slaves dropped their tools and whispered her name. On a conquered outpost at the rim, rebels who had nearly given up raised their heads with something dangerous flickering in their eyes. Even among alien races too frightened to speak, murmurs spread like wildfire. The predators had failed, because their cruelty had not silenced humanity. It had lit a fire that no empire could smother. Lyra lay in the infirmary of the strike cruiser Resolute, her body wrapped in bandages, her mind a haze of pain and fragments of memory. Doctors whispered in awe over her vitals. Her heart had stopped. Her body had ceased all measurable function. And yet here she was, alive, speaking, breathing. Some called it biology, others, luck. But to the soldiers who had carried her from that burning chamber, it was something else entirely, a miracle. Her father's voice came through the comm, breaking as he whispered her name. For the first time in days, Lyra smiled, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. "I'm here, Dad," she whispered. "I came back." But her survival was more than family, more than personal. It was a weapon, one humanity wielded with precision. The broadcast was never shut down. Earth Command made sure of it. Every second of her torture, every moment of her defiance, every heartbeat after death. It was all carried on the winds of space. Not propaganda, proof. The Cathari had wanted a lesson. Now the galaxy had one. Humans could not be broken. The Empire reeled. Worlds that had cowered for centuries stirred with new courage. Resistance groups, once shattered, began to rise. The Cathari's reputation, built on fear and finality, cracked under the impossible truth that even death itself could not keep humanity down. In their high chambers, Cathari strategists argued in panic. Some demanded they erase her, wipe out every human colony before the spark became a flame. Others, quieter but more dangerous, warned that it was already too late. The legend had been born, and legends were harder to kill than flesh. On the Resolute, Lyra sat upright for the first time, her body trembling with weakness. A nurse tried to stop her, but she shook her head. Her voice, rough and broken, carried through the ship's internal comms and out into the stars. "They thought killing me would end the story. But it isn't ending. It's beginning." She paused, breathing hard, but her eyes burned with that same spark the Cathari had tried to extinguish. "We're human. We are fragile. We bleed. We fall. But we always, always stand back up. Even death can't keep us down." Silence followed, and then applause thundered across the ship, rolling through corridors, echoing into the void. Soldiers who had seen too much war, too much death, found themselves believing again. Somewhere deep in the galaxy, a slave whispered to another, "If they can't kill her, maybe they can't kill us either." And so the fire spread. In the end, Lyra Kane was still just a girl, 17, ordinary in 1,000 ways. She was not chosen, not trained, not destined. But that was what made the story so dangerous to the Cathari. Because if an ordinary human could die, rise, and defy an empire, then any human could. Her survival became more than a miracle. It became a promise. The galaxy would remember her screams, but it would remember her heartbeat longer. And somewhere, among the stars, as Cathari fleets scrambled and empires trembled, a single question began to whisper across conquered worlds and dying systems alike. What happens when a species that refuses to stay dead decides to fight back?